one. Right, well, today we have Peter McAleese as a guest. And of course, we've all seen what's happened to him. I know there's new people coming on here now who don't know who Peter McAleese is. They've heard of him and now they want some more. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back. Peter McAleese, growing up in Scotland, he'll tell you where he came from. And we're going to go through it step by step so people get a really good idea of Peter McAleese is. Okay. First of all, Peter, say hi to the audience. That'd be nice.
How are you all doing? And I hope you all enjoy the talk Rusty and I are going to have. So, Rusty, let's get on with it.
Okay, that's an order. Right, so here we are. Peter, just to let them know, you've achieved an awful lot in your life. Just show them the book, No Mean Soldier. If you've got it there, just show them a copy of it. Okay, so this is being reprinted. Could be out in the next 3 weeks-ish, something like that. Brand new. And that'll be up on the shelves, hopefully as soon as possible. That's Peter McAleese's book. For those who've seen Killing Escobar, which is on right now, that again is only part of Peter's book, and he says a small part. It's a small part, but it's a big film and it's going places. So that's out right now. You'll find out exactly where it's on. All you have to do is type in Killing Escobar and you'll see it come up in all sorts of different places. Okay, it's a small subscription. Watch the film. Great. I watched it on Sunday night at 6:15. Opened my eyes as well. So that's what Peter's involved in again at the moment and doing very well. But to do the story of Peter, we know where he is now. We're not going to go through all the military stuff again at the moment. We've just done 3 videos on that. But what we are going to concentrate on is Peter's early life in this particular video. So Peter, where it all started, mate, when you were a kid, if you could just explain, you know, what you got up to as a child up in Scotland all those years ago, and bring them up to life, mate. Bring them up to speed on it.
The first thing I remember about my childhood was I was fascinated by tram cars, and you used to know where the car went by the different colour painted on the car. You know, the yellow car was number so-and-so and it went to a certain place. And one day I got on a car, I think I was only about 4 years old, I stepped on, and the conductor said to me, "Where are you going?" I says, "I don't know." So the cars used to go around in a circle now. I finished up, they dropped me off back where I got on the car, and my mother was all over the place looking for me. So I got a couple of smacks for that one. And then we moved up to a place called Ridley. And it was, I lived in sort of, I can only describe it as the last slum in Glasgow. After it was a sort of, it was a sort of posh area. And it was open country. It led onto Millerstone Steps, places like that. And I lived in this last slum. My childhood, in actual fact, I had a fantastic childhood, but my home life was atrocious. You know, sometimes I used to think, let's just get out here in the morning, and I always had a little penknife, and I'd go out and I'd go around all the different farmers' fields and I'd cut up a turnip and eat it, and then I'd move on to a rhubarb field and go and get a piece of rhubarb. And I was always finding what I called secret passages, you know, shortcuts to get to different places. And I followed the canal once. There was a canal where we lived, and I was gone for the whole day, you know, but nobody ever nobody ever paid any attention. As long as you were back for when it was dark, you know. There wasn't the fear that, you know, something was going to happen to your child then. It was just, as I say, I went out first thing in the morning and I came back last thing at night. I went to a fantastic school, St. Thomas's. It was nuns who were extremely strict. And I went back there, about 10, 15 years ago, and I stood in the schoolyard. And a nun came out and spoke to me. She says, "Can I help you, sir?" And I said, "I used to go to this school." She says, "Come into the office." And she had this big, thick ledger. And she had the names of all my family in it. And it was funny. You know, my aunties, my uncles, everybody there had been to that school. And she said, "Who was the nun when you were here in charge?" I said, "Sister Loyola." She said, "If that woman was still alive, she'd be up at the Hague for infringement of human rights." So one of my things I remember about Sister Loyola was I never went to Mass one Sunday, and I skipped Mass. And what happened if you never went to the children's section? You were up for interrogation first thing Monday morning. So I was called in, and it was Sister Loyola and Sister Vincent, and it was me and a guy called Thomas O'Donnell. So we had missed Mass, but I had been around my friends. I said, "What colour were the vestments? What was the gospel all about? You know, who was the priest?" You know, so I got all my, I knew the questions I was going to be asked, so I got them right, because the last thing I was taking was a beating off the nun, you know. And so we went into the interrogation centre, which was the nun's office, and Sister Loyola was there. And she said, "Peter McAleese," you know, not Peter, Peter McAleese, "you weren't at Mass yesterday." I said, "Oh, yes, sister, I was." I said, "I got there after the consecration, and I went to the older people section of the church." And she went, "Who was the priest?" I said, "Father Courtney." "What colour were the vestments?" You know, I got them all right. "Who were the altar boys?" You know, Tom McGrady and so. And she gave me a big chunk of cocaine ice, you know, as a present. And Thomas O'Donnell, he came clean. He says, "I never went to Mass. You get beat up." It was just the way things were. We just accepted it as norm, you know. It was it's the way things were. And as I say, you know, I lived in an area. There was 60 people lived in this slum we were in, and you know, people got on about, they're always on about their hard childhood and how it, you know, made them men and all this. You know, look, it's only now that I realise we're living in poverty, but poverty is only poverty if you've got something to compare it with. You know, if you get nothing to compare it with, it's normal. As I say, I had a good school life. I played football for the school, and I the highest I got was I got a trial for. I was a goalkeeper because I was tall for my age at that time, and I got a trial for Glasgow once, but I never actually made the Glasgow team. But I was in the school team. As I say, I enjoyed the school, and it's only now, years after it, do I realise that the input some of those teachers put into us kids. And as I say, I found my childhood, again, I'll repeat it again, it was fantastic. But as I say, my home life wasn't that good. Plus the fact is, my father was absent at times, you know. He was incarcerated about a couple of 100 yards up the road in Berlin. And my mother used to, he was in a cell that faced the houses that we lived in. And my mother would say, "Go and look at your dad's window and see what colours in the window," because he used to send messages to my mother with different colours. you know, blues and reds and whatnot. And I used to go and say it's, you know, it's blue, or he's not feeling too well today, he's not handling it too well. But the great thing was, he was getting 3 meals a day, and we were struggling a bit down 300 yards down the road. So there was a fish and chip shop around the corner, and you know, my mother used to say, "Go and get some scratchings from the chippy man," and he liked me. I used to run you know, errands for him and whatnot, and I'd say, "Excuse me, my mother says you get any scratchings," and he knew we were sort of hungry, and he says, "Oh, Peter, look what I've found here. I've found a couple of pieces of fish. You may as well have them." In actual fact, he was giving them to us, and there's some chips here, so he'd make up a bag of fish and chips, and I'd take it back to my mother, and we'd eat it. You know, there was 4 of us in the family at that time, and as I say, when my dad came home, we all had to be, you know, from when he'd finished his incarceration in the carcer, we all had to be up there in the morning, and we had a treat when he came out of prison. We used to get a hot roll because there was a shop round the corner, a baker's, and I used to go for the hot rolls, and we'd all sit around the table and have rolls and butter and a cup of tea. And as I say, the childhood side I enjoyed. And then when I became about 16, you know, I started running about with guys. I wouldn't say they were the wrong guys. It was just people who grew up in Glasgow, and we thought it was normal at that age to get drunk and fight with each other. It takes a bit of believing, but that's how we actually felt. And, you know, we had a little gang there, and we did our old things. We were never into stealing or anything like that. It was mainly fighting with guys for no reason at all, who wanted to fight with us for no reason at all. He just came from a different, there was boundaries or turf, call it what you want. And you fought with them because they came from a different area. Well, and vice versa. So
let's just move forward slightly, Peter. We've got to talk about the bayonet charge.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we need to talk about that. Talk them through the bayonet charge. Okay.
Well, you know, when, you know, it also happened to a friend of mine as well, you know, and he was asked the same question: did you ever get involved in a bayonet charge? You know, and I said, yeah. Were we in the army at the time? You know, what regiment were you with? I says, no, it was in Glasgow. Because the sort of weapon of choice was one of those big French St. Etienne bayonets. They were about 3 feet long. And, you know, that was the weapon of choice. But, you know, we never stabbed anybody with them. They were for beating them with, you know. And another time we got involved, we went up to take this other gang out, and we thought we were invincible, you know. So we got up to a place called Barlanark, which is one of the housing estates in the outskirts of Glasgow. So we were convinced that we could take anybody, and we put the challenge out. And these guys came down the road. There must have been about 30 or 40 of them, and we had only 6 guys. So we did this sort of famous bayonet charge of ours, and we went straight at them, and they beat the living daylights out of us, you know. And for somebody who was in a bayonet charge, I get bayoneted. He beat me about the elbow. There was, you know, cutting both elbows, and the gang split up. We all took off in different directions, and there was a bus going down the road. It must have been doing about 30 miles an hour, and I caught it up and jumped on it to get away.
Well, what about your close friends, Peter? Did any of them sort of follow you at that time? You know, and I know what it's like being in gangs and stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
But did anybody sort of join up with you at the same time, and you sort of ended up in the military together and the paras together? We're going to come on to that later, so we're not going to cover that. Yeah. I just wondered, in your friendship at school, you said was nice, but and as you moved on, you know, you decided to go to the military. Did any of them
There was one guy, Sammy McAllister. Sammy's dead now. He went to the RAF, and believe it or not, he was stationed at Credden Hill in Hereford.
Oh,
And then by the time I got to Hereford myself, he'd moved on and gone somewhere else. He went up to Lookers in Scotland, I think. But he did his time, and he came out, and he just he went back to it. And there's something I always remember about the army. At that time, national service was on. I caught the tail end of it, and the guys would come to the army, and they were all sort of, their backs were straight. The sort of promenade along the road. They had that sort of military bearing because they'd all been in these Scots regiments, and they were fairly strict, and they all carried themselves well. And within maybe a year, 2 years of coming out of the army, they were back to what there was. The heavy drinking. It was a shame to see the deterioration in them. I use the word pitiful. It's just they were good men. It's just the way. It's just where we lived, the subculture of the whole thing.
So yeah, I can. There's a lot of stuff I can relate to, Peter. I mean, and I'm certain some of the listeners and viewers can do exactly the same. But there are times that you don't forget, especially when you're a youngster and you've got no fear at all about anything. It's just amazing how you come through everything, and you might have a scratch here and a broken arm there and so on and so on. But what about education, just before we wrap this one up? Did you manage, if you're like me, you get nothing, mate, but did you manage to get any form of education when you came out of school? Did you have anything, whatever they had?
Yeah, I got it in the army. The army came in. I was very, very fortunate. There was a guy from the education corps called Captain Gillett. He'd been an ex-RSM, in fact. And he took an interest in me. And he said, he looked at my IQ and he said, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be in this class." And what he did is he coached me through everything. And I got a good education in the army. I got up to army full class, first class, which is about GCSE standard. And what I do remember, we had a jock. He was a jock from the education corps, and he was a nut on military history. And he took us all through it, and he get through the Scots regiments. He would wind you up about the paras, and he went through, and actually he covered an awful lot of English military history, the English Civil War, how the jocks got involved in it at Marston Moor. It was interesting, and I became so interested. I got probably one of the higher marks in it within the battalion, and if not the highest, I can't remember. And I'm awful thankful to the army. I wasn't into reading, so when you're away abroad, you have nothing to do, so you'd open a book and read it. So I caught up with those type of things, and then I went to one of the troops I was in. We used to have handwriting competitions, and it's funny, at school I was taught by the nuns that, the handwriting is a projection of yourself and what you feel about yourself, And I came home and leave once from the army, and I was one of my friends and his wife. He was chatting away, and I said, "Give me your address and telephone number." And she wrote down on a piece of paper, and I said to her, "You went to Charlotte Street School." She went, "How do you know?" I says, "I can tell by your handwriting." Because the girls at school, the nuns used to sort of pump it into them, your handwriting. If they, there was nobody used typewriters and stuff like that then, and computers. They said, if you please the eye of the examiner, at least he can read what you're saying. and notes had to be in the margins and everything. I'm very happy with the education I had.
Yeah, I mean,
bearing in mind, when I went to the secondary school, we were getting trained for industry. We weren't being educated. We were being trained to go into industry.
Yeah, well, fascinating part of your life there, Peter, in 20 minutes. You could stay there all day and we could talk stories all day long, but it's just to give everybody that's listening or viewing an insight. And, you know, some of the new stuff I've just heard you say today is, you know, I don't know if I could have done that, but we're all different. And what I want to say is to everybody, thanks for sharing that part of your life, Peter, at the moment. And what we're going to do in the next video, we're going to knock together. You'll see what happened when Peter joined the parachute regiment as a 17-and-a-half-year-old. And we're going to go on from there. So thanks again, Peter. And look forward to more stories, mate.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter.